Now for a look at the national papers today, we're joined by foreign policy writer Thom Woodroofe. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Good.
Now, you want to have a look at a cartoon first.
I do.
Let's see if we can get this up. And I'd like to highlight that Michael made this call last week.
No, this is the
Where's Wally.
The Where's Wally. Yes,
yeah,
I did.
You tweeted it.
This cartoonist has obviously been watching us in the last week and seized my fabulous idea.
It was a great idea. You got a lot of Twitter love.
We
and
did.
that was a genuinely funny joke. No puns required. I thought it was good. I paid it.
But all of my jokes are funny.
I think there's a
Not
whole
all of
range.
them,
What are you
Michael.
saying?
There's a whole range of puns that could be made at the moment, though, about Libya. I mean,
Oh, don't
rebels
worry,
without a
Michael's-
cause is another
Michael's
one that you
probably
could...
made them.
Oh, yes,
using.
yes.
But yeah, look,
We
it's
could go on.
a cartoon. It's published in the Australian, but it's from a Spanish newspaper in Florida. But it really puts the nail on the head of the million-dollar question right now, which is where is Gaddafi? The news that came through here overnight that some of his family, his wife and 3 of his daughters have fled to Algeria. I think firstly it's fascinating that they managed to make it to the land border of Algeria and didn't fly out on a jet a few days ago. But secondly, it's important to keep in mind, I'm not challenging the veracity of this particular one, but it's important to keep in mind throughout these sort of events that often stories about people fleeing or being in certain towns, particularly, for example, Gaddafi and his hometown at the moment, are often brought up by themselves as a sort of decoy to where they're going. Exactly. So it's important to keep those in mind, as inevitably Twitter comments will come out in the next few weeks.
So where do you think he is then?
About where he is. I have no idea. I would think it would be crazy if he was in Tripoli, that's for sure. I mean, there was talk of him being in the bunkers of his compound, which would seem outrageous given that his compound's now well and truly been taken over. His hometown is obviously the next logical one, but I think, again, it seems quite naive to obviously go to your hometown. You'd look for somewhere that would be almost unknown to most people in associating him with that. So, strange, but we'll see.
We don't know. I'm just wondering whether the authorities in Algeria have taken a close look at Mrs. Gaddafi, as in who's under the dress.
Oh, Michael.
Well, he's a very clever dictator. He could be trying to dress up as a woman to escape. Anyway, let's move on.
I think we should.
I'm sure that was the grand plan all along.
Let's go to the Australian, which looks at Japanese politics.
Yeah, the Australian, their A+ section has an enormous spread on the new Japanese PM, and they've actually got quite a lot throughout the paper, maybe perhaps the business slant a bit more than the other newspapers, vis-a-vis The Age and so forth, which has a little bit of coverage but not so much. I think it's crazy. Every time there's a new Japanese Prime Minister, there's an enormous amount of coverage, and they're never particularly different from the norm. This guy, as far as I can tell, he's got no particular Australian links, if we can sort of bring that angle into it. I can't tell if he's visited Australia yet, but I'm sure someone will write that angle up in the next few days. But I think the best article I've read on him so far comes from the China Daily and their editorial today, which makes the point quite clearly of the enormous task that's ahead of him, like any other Japanese Prime Minister. I mean, in the next 5 years, I think they're slated to spend about 230 billion Australian dollars on the tsunami reconstruction. He's obviously got a whole range of other challenges with him, and when he's only probably got 12 months in the term, they spend most of their time solidifying their power than they do actually doing the job. So.
But he's got many more challenges than his predecessors did, obviously.
Yeah, he does, and I think his predecessor probably held on a little bit longer, and I thought would either probably get a bounce, and that might be the end of this sort of musical chairs philosophy of Japanese prime ministership. But in the end it didn't, and he inevitably moved on once he passed. Strangely enough, he set his mandate to when he would leave on 2 particular parts of legislation, not on the tsunami reconstruction, which I would have thought would have been the logical one. You say, well, look, when that job's done, or when we're well on the way to the recovery, then I'll change over. But instead he put it on 2 pieces of legislation, so it was weird.
Let's look at the New York Times, which reveals, and it's no great surprise to a lot of us, that the members of the Bush administration weren't exactly one big happy family, were they?
No, well, it almost does. I mean, Dick Cheney's memoir's released today, so obviously the liberal-leaning New York Times' review isn't necessarily all positive.
It's described as often pugnacious in tone.
It is. So it's co-written or ghost-written, or maybe even entirely written by his daughter Liz, though he's meant to have written it all I think in pencil, handwritten on legal pads actually. But anyway, but look, the New York Times makes the point that just like he cherry-picked information on the war in Iraq, he cherry-picks information in this biography. It's very positive for Bush, bar one exception when Cheney proposed in a security meeting to bomb a Syrian reactor in, I think, 2007, and everyone around the table, including Bush, disagreed. But there's all sorts of those little sort of nuggets of tabloidy esque things, which I love. So, for example, he discloses some of the undisclosed locations he was often taken to, which were so secret they were Camp David and his home, I think. He talks about he had a letter of resignation written in case his heart condition caused an issue and he didn't want a constitutional crisis of being incapacitated.
He does still have health problems.
Yeah, and in fact another one he mentions in 2010 when he had surgery, he was unconscious actually for several weeks. And the other one, which is obviously quite interesting, is his best friend, I think it was, who was shot in the face when he was quail hunting. He sort of unreservedly apologises and talks about the stress that put on him at the time. So interesting, another read for the political junkies out there.
Yeah, OK, let's go to the Canberra Times next.
Sure, quick one. Interesting article about basically the diplomatic quarter in Canberra expanding to accommodate new countries like South Sudan and East Timor. I just think it's a sort of fascinating diplomatic angle that inevitably when Canberra was built in, I think it was the design competition went out in 1908 and it was started in about 1913. Obviously the number of countries was about less than a third of what it is today, and therefore to accommodate that, but also the sprawling size of things like the US Embassy there, which genuinely is quite enormous. They inevitably have to increase the size of the diplomatic quarter there.
There's some fantastic buildings there. I don't know whether you've spent much time walking through the diplomatic area. It's, in front of the US Embassy, you do feel as like you're in downtown, Maryland. Same with the Japanese one, Tokyo. The Chinese embassy is quite magnificent as well. It's actually, the design of embassies around the world is actually quite a big sort of architectural topic, if you will, and how they design them. For example, I think it might be the US in one of the Middle Eastern countries just designed one entirely out of glass, but reinforced glass to prevent attacks and so forth. And that sort of stuff is sort of what architects love doing. One-upmanship. Exactly. So there you go.
And finally, Daily Beast Online.
Yeah, Daily Beast has a great sort of 9 Irene overreactions, so it obviously wasn't as bad as everyone thought.
You'll get involved in this, Michael, no doubt.
On the 6th anniversary today, I think it is, of Hurricane Katrina. My favourite's the New Jersey Governor, Christie, who said, get the hell off the beach and you can go get a tan when the world ends, he said. So it's worth a read and watch of some of the videos there.
What were some of the other overreactions that you liked there?
There was a few of sort of weathermen claiming that, all hell was breaking loose where they were, and then there were nudist strippers behind them doing water slides.
Shades of Choppergate.
There was one guy who was claiming that all the dirt was being thrown out of the water onto him when it was actually the sewage farm. And
I saw that. It was. I had to cover my face when I was watching that and watch through my fingers. It was dreadful.
Americans don't exaggerate. What are you saying?
Anything to be the weatherman anchor on,
that's true.
On the US channels.
You need to be an action man or woman to be a weather person in the States.
So there you go.
Tom, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.